Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad to see you here today. I know many of us don't come to campus on Friday, so we appreciate you making an extra effort to be here. My name is Jenny Burnett. I'm director of the Institute for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies here at Georgia State University. I'm also a professor in the Department of Anthropology. We're so excited to welcome some guests from Zambia and the Zambian diaspora and the community to Georgia State for this event. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Frida Mwamba Brazil, co-founder of Zambians for Leadership in America. Dr. Brazil is a seasoned professional with an impressive career in corporate America, where she mastered the art of leadership, business strategy, and organizational development. Frida's extensive experience navigating the corporate world has equipped her with a remarkable ability to manage teams, drive business growth, and foster a culture of innovation and success. As a proud Zambian American, Frida integrates her corporate expertise with her passion for a lasting impact in both professional and community-driven arenas. Frida is deeply committed to mentorship, empowering emerging leaders and young professionals to chart their paths with confidence. Frida's influence goes far beyond corporate boardrooms. She's actively involved in championing social causes in Zambia, where she dedicates her time, network, and skills to advancing women's entrepreneurship, youth empowerment, and social justice. Through her work with the ZLA Foundation, Frida consistently uplifts others and inspires them to realize their full potential, both personally and professionally. As part of her commitment to showcasing trailblazing African leaders, Frida is proud to introduce you to one of the brightest minds in Africa, Ms. Monica Musonda. And this is our second year collaborating on bringing a dynamic Zambian speaker, a woman, to Georgia State University. Thank you, Frida, for your collaboration on this event, and I look forward to future collaborations. Please come forward and introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Was that good enough? It's Friday. How are y'all doing? Good. Thank you. Well, it is my pleasure to have this opportunity and honor to introduce a true trailblazer in Africa, Monica Musonda. She is a formidable businesswoman. She's an esteemed lawyer. Who thought lawyers can become business persons that run multi-million-dollar businesses? She has done amazing work, and as a visionary entrepreneur whose extraordinary achievements have not only redefined the business landscape in Zambia, but has also made a significant impact across Africa. Her impressive portfolio includes serving as a non-executive director on big multinational organizations like Airtel Networks, as well as Zambia Breweries, where she holds the esteemed position of chair. She lends her expertise as a juror for the Cartier Women's Initiative, and as the founder and CEO of Java Foods, Monica has become a beacon of innovation, excellence, and sustainability. Her entrepreneurial spirit and unwavering commitment to quality have propelled Java Foods to be at the forefront of the Southern African instant noodle market with easy noodles. Who likes noodles? She has created a brand that is now a household name in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. And beyond her business acumen, she's a passionate advocate for women's empowerment and gender diversity in leadership, championing causes that inspire and empower a new generation of entrepreneurs. That's you. Her transformative vision and relentless dedication to creating positive change have left a mark on the business world. She is not just a leader, but a true inspiration whose impact resonates far beyond boardrooms and businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in celebrating and bringing to the stage brilliant Monica Musonda.
I need you to do some marketing work. She was such a great introduction. Right? Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming out today. I hope I'm in the right place. I really appreciate it, and I'm so thankful to be invited actually to Georgia State University to speak a little bit about women empowerment and entrepreneurship. I think you got the introduction, but I'd like to start off with a story. I started my business in 2012 after hopefully a 20-year career in law. So I did law for a pretty long time. And I think it was my third year in. Business was tough. We're trying to understand because I had not lived and worked in Zambia for quite a while. And I was really struggling to get the business off the ground, to get the business to actually be in business. But I was very proud of what I was doing because I really was thinking about the impact and what we were going to do when we succeeded. So I was on my way to South Africa to meet a supplier, and I got on the plane. The gentleman next to me said to me, "Oh, it's really nice. You look familiar. What do you do?" And I quickly said to him, "I run a food processing business, right?" And he was like, "So what's the name of your restaurant?" And I was like, "Restaurant?" For him, the first thing he would think about for a woman was to run a restaurant, because he could not actually envisage that I was actually an owner of a manufacturing business, a packaged food business, which had food on the shelf, which people bought. For him, the only thing he could see was someone who ran a restaurant. And I sat there with a bit of shock, and then I realized that it wasn't his limitation, but the limitation of the society in which we live in. Right? And this is one of the many stories I tell about how I've actually grown this business and how many challenges we've had to face to really open the doors to let people see that actually it shouldn't be the exception, but the rule. So we are now seeing a lot of growth in certain sectors like education, where now a lot of women are owning nurseries as a business, right? Schools as a business, restaurants as a business, through a franchise, but not restaurants as in the back of your house, right? So it's really my honor to sort of tell you about how this all became and what we are learning from it and why it actually is leadership. I actually feel I almost have an obligation to tell the story. I have an obligation to pay it forward so each of us know what role we need to play to change things, to have more women think of entrepreneurship as an option. Think about it, 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of people were just trying to get a job. A lot of women were just trying to get into more formal employment. But now we are educating more women, and we are seeing many more women come into formal employment, although we are losing them somewhere along the line. But that's not a topic we're going to discuss today. So, as I said, I started my career as a lawyer because that's what you do. In Africa, there are probably 3 or 4 things that your parents tell you to do. And I think it's the same maybe for a number of us. You're either a lawyer, or an engineer, or a doctor, and nothing else in between. So I'm probably a lot older than a lot of you here. So it's very different now. I think the discussion now, there's so many more careers now. But when I was going to university, those were the only options. But it was a very welcome option because I was very ambitious. I could see great things coming. And actually ended up in the United States working for a development finance institution in Washington, which was great because I just thought this is the really pinnacle of my career. I get to do work in development across the world, but being based here in the US. And on one day, I walked into a meeting. I was invited to sit in a meeting with a gentleman who was looking to finance the first cement plant in Nigeria. And of course, the conversation in the back was that it was too much for this guy. He was a trader. How could he possibly want $400 million to do what with? That we should give him much less because, it's Africa after all, and he has no experience. But what was exceptional about this man was that he was ambitious and he loved the continent and he believed fundamentally that things were not going to change for Africa if Africans didn't lead, right? And so at the end of the meeting, he said to me, "What was I doing in America?" I was like, "Well, I have a job." And he was like, "Yeah, there's so much more to do in Africa." And 4 months later, he gave me an offer. And I went to work in Nigeria, where I'm not from, by the way. And I had been outside of the continent for some time. And I left the cozy job in DC and went to live in Lagos for what is now the most successful African conglomerate called the Dangote Group. And at the time I joined Mr. Dangote, he was building his first cement plant, right? And everyone was like, "Oh my God, he won't do it," right? And he will not be successful. And now we're speaking about how he's built this, maybe the largest fertilizer plant now. I mean, so he has done something to really change mind shifts, but it also impacted me. Remember, I was a lawyer, but he impacted me in my thinking in the sense that I thought, actually, you can actually impact your continent, not only through legal work or sitting behind a desk, but we really need to get involved. And after 4 years of working with the Dangote Group, I changed everything and gave up the law completely and moved back to Zambia to try to make a difference in my own country. And so it was very, very impactful. And that was, I think, the first, I would call it one of the first bold moves I did, because it really challenged me. And I thought, well, you know, I really see it. I couldn't see where else I was going to really make impactful change. And I wanted to make a change. I really wanted to, for my country to be known for something. I wanted to be part of that known brand or whatever it was going to be, but I knew I couldn't do it sitting behind a desk in someone else's country. So for me, it's the challenge of really addressing or finding what your purpose was, you know, and I think that was the first thing I saw. I mean, it comes, the real questioning about what your purpose is can come very early, or it evolves. And it can also change, because remember, my goal was to be the very best lawyer for 20 years, but it evolved. Because something happened to me. I was in a group of people who had a completely different perspective, but a very, very strong, powerful perspective, which impacted me, right? But despite all this great, you know, impact story, I go home to Zambia with no experience and nobody really knows you. And I literally crash land into it. I'm but a woman after all. And the bank manager won't even give me an overdraft, despite 20 years of experience in law, by the way, because I knew nothing. They doubted that this business could be a business. Most women are, it's probably a hobby. She'll go back to what she normally does. Or it's her husband's business and he's giving her something to do. Or it's her father's business, right? But it couldn't be my idea. It couldn't be my business. So the first hurdle I faced, which I had not faced before, was people actually doubting my capacity. And for women, and for the men here who might not know, we get that a lot, right? Still having to prove yourself over and over again. So as much as I tell you, it'll stop, it won't stop. It's just a matter of life. But I think it really shocked me, because I was like, I have 20 years, but don't you know where I'm coming from? But no one would get out of bed in my first few years. And I really had to bootstrap the business to get where it was. And then even for myself, I mean, to get the product out, because we were testing a product that nobody knew about, we really believed in. I mean, I sold the product a bit as being a proudly Zambian product. And it's quite significant for a country where a lot of stuff is brought into the country and there's nothing that is really your own. So in the US, you have famous brands, I mean, like Pepsi or Coke. Those are American brands, right? In Zambia, say in 2010, 2011, nobody would really tell you what a Zambian brand was, apart from maybe the beer brand. Okay, but apart from the beer brand, there was nothing else. And I was really surprised by that, because we are Zambian consumers. So what do we eat? What do we love? Other people's brands? And that was the challenge. And I was like, that was the space we saw, right? How do we create a Zambian brand, a Zambian product that Zambians would love, that Zambians would be proud of? What was it? Where's the Zambian we're talking to? So we began to ask questions, really, that maybe others were too lazy to ask because they were comfortable with the market. Simple questions, you know, what are you spending your money on? And really, we were talking to people like you, the students. You have like $5. What do you eat? You don't have time. You know, what influences you? How do you like to be talked to? When do you like to be talked to? How much are you spending? When do you spend it? How big should the pack size be? All the things that everyone else was too lazy to ask, we asked, right? And it was really helpful because we were small enough to be humble enough to ask the question, because nobody else. So little things which helped us get around them by playing it small and being nimble and really bringing ourselves down to the ground, which bigger brands didn't do, really changed everything for us after we lost a lot of money. So we lost a lot of money for the first 4 years, and then everything went, right? And then I had to find more money because we had expanded, right? And that was also quite a hard story. But it was really insightful, because despite all the hardships, despite the doubt, despite the fact that I had to use all the money I had earned to build the business, to prove that it was actually not a part-time gig or wasn't a hobby, it was really fulfilling when someone actually came up to us and said, how did you think about that? because that's all my kids eat now, right? And it was a really proud moment because we realized we were onto something. But what's also more interesting about it, because it's not just ramen, because yeah, there's a lot of ramen, but I think for us, what's important is that the raw material is local. It is made or farmed by local farmers, right? And this wheat normally would just be made into bread. No one ever thought about making something else, right? So we were probably the first people outside of bread to support a farmer and say, can you grow more, or can we take more? That's the first thing. The second thing is that we fortify it. So we thought about, how do we make this better? Because yeah, ramen is a bit too much of processed food. We know the issues with it, but we really asked the question that we want to do better, want to do good. And that also stood out for us, just by being a little bit more, by caring, having empathy, because that's what for me was important for me. Creating a brand which had empathy, which was part of a family, which thought about things, right? It's not even rocket science, again, that many brands weren't doing it. So we learned a lot, and I think I've got to say, it did help to be a female entrepreneur. We had a different touch. And mothers, it just so happens, right, that mothers are my target market as well, and young moms, right? Because mothers now can be 20. Actually, we know our target market is like 20 to 45. And so we spoke differently. We asked questions. We said, what did you want? When do you want it? What do you want best for your kids? And so it really, really helped to be this female entrepreneur, despite the difficulties, right? So there we went along, and then I went and I thought, well, now I really need to build a big factory, right? Had these great ambitions. And then the struggle to raise money, and money, international money, is much harder than we thought. And there was really nobody there to tell you how to do it. And again, to convince people that actually, if we give you the money, you'll be able to use it correctly, you'll pay it back. It was so much harder. And then COVID hit, right? Of all the things no one would expect, right? But sometimes you can never waste a good crisis, because people really still needed convenience. So what really helped us, or helped me, was about remaining consistent to who we were and really working hard to deliver on what we promised. So those are some of the key things for me which worked, and really, really firmly standing on the fact that I really went inside and drew power from the fact that I was a female entrepreneur. So what has since happened for me is that many people, many women ask, I have this passion, or I have been baking cakes and I can't manage, I actually work in an office, I don't want to do this anymore. And now what we're seeing a lot more of is women really addressing what their passion is, right? But looking for the direction, looking for, how do I do this? How do I scale a business? How do I keep records? Or how do I get licensed for it? And that's the missing link. And by the way, it took me 10 years to get any form of traction. It really is a shame, and a big shame, because we live in an information age. We should, right? But you'll be so surprised for female entrepreneurs how hard it is to get the most basic information on, for instance, safety, food safety. That you have to read this colossal amount of information, and it's just not available to you, right? Or it costs you an arm and a leg to get this consultant, because the bank says you need a consultant to pay you in order to pay them in order to tell you. And that also holds us back. It's the ecosystem is still so hard particularly for small businesses, right? So these are some of the things, and just yesterday I met a young lady here in Georgia who has it's called e-commerce lab, I think that's what it's called. And she has set up this ecosystem to help small business, particularly women business, to say, what do you need to do with marketing? What should you be saying? How do you create a podcast? And all these great things. And I thought, this is so commendable. How do you even ship a product and using e-commerce? How many days? How much does it cost? What are my competitors doing? But it was so amazing to me, because I can tell you, when I started, there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. There was no support whatsoever, because again, the ecosystem was not expecting, women or any entrepreneurs to come in the space, and they weren't trying to encourage them. But now things are changing. And so that's why I said, COVID actually changes a lot of that. It disrupts everything, because now we can have this almost egalitarian platform called e-commerce. where people don't need to see that you're a woman-run business, they just see the product, right? So this is a time, actually, if you ask me, to be much more courageous as women entrepreneurs, to actually step out and challenge ourselves, because so much has changed. If you look at the statistics maybe 10 years ago, and look at statistics today about how many great products are actually run by women, owned by women, it's amazing. And it's purely not because there was more money, I can tell you, probably the money is still the same, but the environment changed. You know, everything that runs the system changed, the rules changed. But the only thing I have to say is that we shouldn't sit back and wait. You know, if you have this burning desire and passion, and you fundamentally believe that you have the skills to move forward, try it, right? And that's the boldness we talk about, because I think it's really trusting yourself that you have a foundation, and the failure may come. There's nothing to be afraid of because you learned something. And I just said, I had a talk on Wednesday now saying, you know, failure is thinking that it always has to be on this road, or the sky always will be blue. That actually can be a shade of purple, but it's still a beautiful sky, right? And we must allow that change, that you must be flexible and pragmatic to allow the change, right? But it's also being mature enough to handle that. That's leadership, right? And also handling teams. And the lady I met yesterday said to me that, actually, you know, I used to think money was my biggest issue. Now it's actually, how do I manage a team of 20 smart, young, creative people? How do we all make sure we show up and put 100% in making sure the product or the service we provide is 100% every day, each day for our customers? And that was her big challenge. That is actually, as you grow, as you scale, how do you keep everything excellent as it was when you were one person? And it was a very interesting kind of dynamic, because I understand what she was saying, because it's about creating a culture of excellence, a culture of passion has to drive through you as a founder to the people who are working for you. Do they believe in what you're trying to achieve, the mission and the vision, the product you're trying to sell? Do they see the problem you're trying to address? Do they believe we're solving it? And you as founder have to make it almost contagious for them, right? Otherwise it won't get done. But imagine every day going through that. So you as the founder have to wake up every morning and be enthusiastic to drive cultural change and happiness, and still deal with the bank manager who doubts you. That's life, right? Every single day, every single day. Or just like some guy who just says, you know, returns the product, or you get a bad review. Even when you get a bad review, you still have to get up the next day. And those are some of the issues about, you know, for particularly women founders. And where do you go when that happens? But I mean, I'm really encouraged, if I can say that today, about the many women's groups. I mean, I would not be sitting here and talking about this if things have not progressed. You know, I would not be seen as someone to share, something to share for all of you. I come from a completely different jurisdiction with a lot more complexities than perhaps in the US. Right? But the fact is that your professor felt that I had something to share, that there could be similarities, but there's things you could also learn from, right? And I really hope I've been able to share some of those learnings with you and really involve some questions, because there's so many interesting case studies we could talk about, and so many stories I could share with you. Some really good and some really horrific, actually, but I still smile about it, you know. And I'm so happy to be able to be here to share with you some of these the learnings. So I hope I have done my 10 minutes. And we have dropped a seed, because what we wanted to do is have a fireside chat, and then we were going to open it up for questions. And so I hope you got some juices burning. Yeah, right? Thank you. To London, so I flew overnight into London, and literally I turned on my phone, and my financial advisor then said to me that my financing had crashed. So I had to speak about my TED Talk the next day about how fantastic the business was. Like, no money, and you know, literally, I just didn't know what was going to happen. But you know, you go back and you solve it, right? And actually, I can tell you the valuation of that. Had we closed that deal, we would be a very different business today. So some things happen for a reason. And I was looking for less than $1 million in 2016, and in 2018 we raised $5 million. So sometimes actually things happen for a reason. But I was telling you, I took a deep breath at that TED Talk, and I was like,
Yeah, I infested it.
Yes, so I think I have a good friend and what she says often is sometimes the door closes and then you just have to turn around and notice the window's open. So sometimes, yes, failure is a good learning experience, though incredibly difficult when we go through it. So, on that note, what have been the most important personality traits or skills that have helped you succeed in your career?
So, resilience, and tenacity, flexibility. I think one thing I've realized as being an entrepreneur is that on Monday, it was meant to be this way, but on Wednesday, you needed to change the route. There's nothing wrong with it. So I've learned to be really flexible because a lot of things are a lot of variables, lots of moving parts, and you just have to be flexible. And I think that's one of the key learnings as well. I think on a personal level is really not being afraid, because failure, and this is what they say, is a little bit of madness. Most entrepreneurs is because nothing makes sense sometimes, but you keep on going, right? So it means that you really have to step on the fear and keep on going. And even if you fail, you take it as a learning.
Great. And how have you developed those characteristics of persistence and accepting criticism, trying again, flexibility?
So I think it's also understanding your own limitations. As I said when I started, I had a 20-year career in law, had never run a business, never sold anything, had not lived in Zambia, had no idea about food processing or food. And I realized that I really needed support and I needed to ask more questions. And sometimes appear that I didn't know everything, right? So I really very quickly realized wherever I could get it, I'm really using the power of the network to say, well, do you know that person? Do you think they'll be able to see me? And I think that has really helped. I think people don't take it against you when you say, can you help? Or I don't know, as opposed to sort of racing or like, everything and everything crashes. So it's been very helpful. And also now I find that there is an expert for everything, right? You just need to know where to find them. Yeah. There's somebody who knows something, even online, right? Yeah, so helps.
So you told in your talk a story about how when you arrived in Zambia that the bank managers didn't want to give you a line of credit to develop your business because they had lots of assumptions about what you were doing and why you were doing it, who was actually in charge of the business. We would all call that patriarchy in the Institute of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. I know it's sometimes hard for our students today to realize this. Like even my mother was born into a world where she could not open her own bank account or a credit card or start a business without either her father or her husband signing. And that's the world that she lived in, until first 1974, the law changed. So can you tell us though about strategies you've used to deal with patriarchy when it's getting in the way of what you want?
And the reality is it changes, right? The color of patriarchy changes every generation. So we have to find a mature way to handle it. So I think the way I've tried to handle it is really to come with it from a point of professionalism and skill as well, and also consistency. So I think you find a lot of people just tend to push back, even when they don't know. But if you come back and say, particularly today, there's a lot of laws where they can't do this certain thing. So a bank manager cannot say, well, I can't give you the money because you share the property, the asset which is being mortgaged with your husband, or your husband needs to sign, things like that. You can't say that. But if you say, actually, you can't say that, or maybe you can further explain where you're getting that from, but you're not necessarily, you're challenging him, but you're challenging him with a sense of maturity, and you're giving him facts. I think it's a lot easier to deal with, right? And it's happened a lot. I was speaking about how I was in a meeting this year alone, and I've been running my business now 12 years, and this is a room of manufacturers, and one of the men in the room, because there are very few women in manufacturing at scale in Zambia, said, oh, Monica is really good at admin, she should do it. But we were all there as peers. We were all there as manufacturers. He said, I should do it. And I was like, I'm sure that someone else can do that, actually, because that's not what I came to do. So, I found a way to be sometimes playful about it. It's again, please understand, I come from a different environment. It's almost as if you sometimes have to tiptoe, particularly the older men, around it before you hit them on the head. You know what I mean? But you have to know how to handle it. And now, when they're used to seeing you a lot more. So when I started the business, they were like, she's gonna go away. I'm still here. So now they have to deal with me. So, and now I bring other women in the room. So that's another thing we've done. And another thing we talk about, that it will be harder and harder for women if you're the only woman. So let's try to move away from being that exception and open the door for others, so everyone gets comfortable with the fact of dealing with women entrepreneurs, women directors, women chair people, because they're used to seeing you, right? But you also have a role to play to bring those people in as well, right? So.
Right, thank you for sharing that. So if you could have coffee with any historical figure, living or dead, who would you choose and why?
So interesting, right? I've been thinking about this, right? I'll keep it local. Our founding president was a guy called Kenneth Copeland. And it's really important because in Africa today, we have leadership which is quite old for whatever reason. Well, actually in America too, actually. You know, but I can tell you, KK was a president before he turned 40. You know, they had very little education and they overturned the Brits to change the whole way things were run. And I'd love to ask him, apart from the burning desire to free, you know, what was it that made him stand up for the whole country? And he had one of the most gender diverse cabinets, and even more than we have today, you know, and to really, really change the status quo. And by the way, he made mistakes, but in the beginning days, when you're so young, you have no experience, and you're fighting a whole like country. You know, what was it? What did that take? You know, and how did you bring everybody along? Because leadership was bringing everyone to say this is the right thing. Because there were some countries who were saying, actually, it's not too bad to have someone else look after you. But he was saying we have to look after ourselves. So I think I'll keep it at KK if I could. Yeah.
Okay, good, great. So that brings up another topic that many of our students would talk about as being anti-colonialism. So can you talk about, in being an African entrepreneur and having worked, for example, for the Gagoda Group, you know, that's one of the first Black-owned Indigenous African conglomerates. So can you talk about how you have dealt with that aspect of white supremacy and its persistence in your career?
So I think in Africa we'll call it sort of multinational corporation, and probably we wouldn't use the word white supremacy.
Of course not,
right? So, and we have a lot of those, right? These are big companies. Obviously, they're grown outside of the continent, and who control the way trade is done, control the raw materials, and control how the market is structured. So the difference is, when I worked for Dangote, he was big enough that people actually stepped back because he really challenged the status quo. On a personal level, when I started in Zambia, they actually closed the door. So they wouldn't let me list in supermarkets. So, you know, supermarkets, these are very, you know how it is, you know, they allow you to list, put your product on shelf. They tell you how much you can sell it at, how you sometimes have to pay them for the shelf space as well. And I remember not being allowed because they didn't want Zambian products on the shelf, right? And the only way we changed that was to really complain and lobby governments, because that's what we've had to do, to say there is no way we should be importing food when we actually make it here. That they should justify why they put on a truck for millions and millions of kilometers to come up and put on the shelf in Zambia, and what this does to our country. So the change came because we were able to show what benefit it was going to happen to our own country by opening it up. It is a very slow process because maybe food is a little bit better, you know, but there's some industries where it's still very close. So I can speak about the petroleum industry, controlled by some of the biggest players in the world, and they close it off. You know, fertilizer, you know, the really big industries are still run by multinational corporations. But the only way we're going to change this is if we as private sector, as well as government, really work together to actually change and set the right rules and regulations and encourage them to partner, because it's not kicking them out. It really is about partnerships today.
So when you have made a bold move or maybe a mistake during your career, and people you love or respect have criticized you for it, how have you responded? How have you handled their criticism? What have you done?
Yeah, it's a learning because it's you come from an environment where you thought you knew everything and then you realize very quickly you don't. But one thing I've learned is that it's always good to get the feedback. It's always good to get other people's perspectives because you may learn something from it, and you're definitely not the be and end of all the information in the world. That someone may see something different which may support you. I think in the beginning it was very difficult because I was so used to kind of this way, my way, the highway. But I've realized the benefits of other people's views. And sometimes you don't always agree. What I've also learned to do is give constructive sort of feedback on the feedback, right? To say that, this might, why would you think that would work? And have some form of, but also come from a point of knowledge when you're when you're in that session, and not necessarily throw your toys out the cot and say, I actually don't agree with you. But actually, the reason why I did that was because of this. And I thought it was the right thing to do, but I hear your point, but also could you hear mine kind of thing. But I gotta say, and to be fair to a lot of people, it is a work in progress. But it's also appreciating what you learn from others. I mean, the fact is I'm here because we have felt that there's something you can learn from me. And possibly I'm gonna learn something from you about your environment. And that in itself means that we're always learning, continuously learning. So I think that's a really important.
So follow up, during your talk, you had mentioned that for the first 4 years, your business lost a lot of money, you said. What did you do when you woke up at night at 2 or 3 a.m.? I'm just assuming that's what happens to me. And self-doubt or panic set in. How did you manage that situation? How did you keep going?
Self-doubt, how it's gonna pay bills. I mean, it's really hard. And it's the story of every entrepreneur about, do you move in your parents, the house of the parents, and just how to really manage bills, because you lose most entrepreneurs in the first 5 years actually lose so much money because it takes so much longer to get the business case. And for me, it was really frightful because I was like, I've given up everything. I've given up what I know, a great job, a really respectful career, to come and basically crash land in an environment which was not easy, right? And everyone expected you to fail because that's what they expect. This is not going to work, right? But I think what I took comfort in was that, well, if it really failed, then I was going to go apply for a job. Somebody somewhere was going to hire me, right? And that's the thing that we also talk about is that you have a skill. All of us here actually all have a skill, but do you appreciate you have that skill? So you can always fall back on something. And so, you can always support somebody in something. So there's never 100% failure. And what I did, I'll tell you, I quickly realized that this was going to take longer than I thought. And that's when I decided to diversify my income. And I did a few programs and then began to sit on boards for 2 reasons. One, the money was also helpful, but 2, because I felt by sitting on a board of mostly large corporates, is I learned how to run my own business. You learned how other people manage risk, how they did marketing, how they built a culture within their organization, performance management, how they appointed people, things I had no idea about, but sitting in a room in someone else's boardroom and hearing how they had systems and processes only helped me think about my own business. So sometimes a crisis, if you're smart enough and see what else is around you, how very quickly you can learn from others. And that's how I learned using it from other corporates. Just simple things like how do we hire people? What do you look at? I had no idea, or how do you continue to do succession planning or professional development? It really has helped to see how other institutions do that and supported us. Yeah.
That's great. I have one last question for you, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. I just want to warn the audience so they're ready. So you had mentioned that one of your mentees or a colleague had a woman entrepreneur had talked about how difficult it is to manage other people in a team. I know one thing I've struggled with in my career as a leader is I do like to lead with empathy and with care. But sometimes people are not meeting up to your expectations. So how did you learn how to give that critical feedback, or maybe even when it gets so bad you have to fire someone? Like how did you manage that, and what do you have strategies you can suggest for us? I'm here to learn.
So I went back to being mean girl. So I came out, I was saying just before the talk, how I came from, corporate law being a very high stress, but a very sort of mean type of environment. And one thing I do know is that when you have to be hard, when you have to tell people the truth, when performance is affecting the performance of others, or even affecting yourself, that you need to have hard decisions, right? So what it means is that sometimes you have to be tougher, and you have to be factual. You have to have everything, set up, on this day, this is what it was, we spoke about it, and we said we'll do this, and we haven't seen the results, and you understood the implication of not doing it would be this, and we are here, right? So I have got rid of some senior people before, but I think also people say, oh yeah, Monica's really hard. I'm hard when I need to be hard, right? And but also hard and factual. And I can tell you, I come from a different environment. I feel Americans are much more direct, Zambia, we're a little bit more passive aggressive, we don't say it to your face when we want to fire you, actually. But I would be like, actually, it's really nice that you've come, but you need to be clearing out your desk, because we talked about this last week, and people are almost surprised at it. But you have to, they say, fail fast, like hit it and then go, and then tomorrow you'll be better. So I don't know if that's help. I just think sometimes it's also a character as well, because it is really having the character to say things, even if it's bitter in your mouth, to say it and trust that the bitterness, once you've said it, it's out. So it's a process, though.
We'll open it up now for your questions. Yes.
And you mentioned some lowlights about being a founder and CEO, but I want to know some highlights about being a woman.
Yeah, many, right? So I can tell you, first of all, I'm here to receive an award from the bank. Highlight, to be celebrated. I have never, I don't think when I was a lawyer, anyone said good job. I'm even emotional about it, because it's been such a long road, and for someone to say you're doing great. And by the way, it's not that we're like profitable. It's just that people see what we do, and it inspires Zambians to say they can do better, and Zambians will do better than me. All we've shown them is the possibility of what can happen, right? And that's all I've done. I've told them that you won't sleep at night and you may be broke, but gosh, it's such a great ride, right? So I think that for me has been, on a personal level, one of the most satisfying things, for people to stop you and say, how did you think about that? And it's right in front of you. And often, right, business ideas are right in front of us, but we complicate it by adding but actually it's just you're answering a question and a need. And that's how some of the greatest businesses have been run, by keeping it simple, right? So I think that's been great. And also for myself, to show myself that it's possible to change your career and be so fulfilled by it. And I don't think I could go back. I think even if it completely failed, like if we went into bankruptcy, I very much doubt I would be applying for a corporate legal job right now. I doubt that. I think I would probably do something else. So those are some of the highlights, yeah.
Yes.
There's a virtual question
Excellent.
Super.
that asks, what are things you wish you had known before?
Sure. There are a lot of things I wish I knew before. Perhaps I would have chosen an easier product. It took like 6 or 7 years to get traction, right? So maybe if I had thought, and this was really because Zambians are just socialized differently. It takes a lot longer for them to adjust, right? So I could have done a biscuit, maybe, But then I was thinking, of course this is going to sell, and it didn't sell, and we lost so much money because it just took so long. So I wish I knew that. I wish I understood the whole FMCG retail business, because as I said, you finally get a listing and you put this great product on the shelf, and then the guy says you owe him money, and you're like, but why? And that's because the shelf has to be paid for, you have marketing expenses, and then you give me a discount, and then you're actually in the negative, right? So it was very interesting to me to say that actually that shouldn't have been my aspiration. I should have found other ways, or smaller supermarkets, and now you could use e-commerce, right? So you've got your virtual supermarkets. But just really understand the market landscape and see how we would have planned differently. Because we ended up thinking that was where we wanted to be, and ended up like selling one box to across the street and paying so much more for the box as well. So I think that was another thing. And also, I mean, the difficulty in Zambia or even on the continent is the lack of data and research. It's so hard to sit here and do a great business plan where you can't actualize how big the market is because you don't have the information, right? So I almost wish that maybe we took a little bit more time, maybe, I mean, that would cost us a little bit more money to really have understood the market and the consumer, what they wanted and things like that. But I mean, all in all, yes, it's taken us much longer. But now we understand the consumer much more. And now we're looking at a different consumer outside of Zambia. I had a really interesting question yesterday or the day before about whether the United States was a potential for as a market, because there's a really big push under what they call Prosper Africa, under AGOA, to send more products into the US from the continent. And I saw yesterday a lot of this lady who's bringing everything from honey to body lotions from founders on the continent to this US market, right? So it was really interesting to see there are other markets if we really interrogate it.
Yes.
Sorry, but do you plan on expanding?
Yeah, we have to. And I'll tell you why. Simple business, it's like a business issue. So for us, I now have other shareholders, and they call it a single product risk. So we're in that space where we've now grown this really great noodle brand, and now you're at risk. So if everyone stopped eating noodles, we'll have no business, right? So we're now thinking about, and that's what I love about being American, because I had some skinny popcorn yesterday, and I was like, what is this, right? Can we take it? So I'm really happy to be here to see about other innovations. So I think that's one of my kind of fears, like what's the next big hoo-ha, that we can create, where we can find this space. Exciting, but also it takes that much longer because it's competitive. There's big brands out there. So I'm definitely not trying to make Coke, right?
Yeah.
But what else can I make? What else can I make that the market would want, and that what are they willing to pay for? Yeah.
So I was wondering, I think the way a lot of economies in Africa are run, particularly capitalist economies, with large corporations, they tend to necessitate inequality, particularly for Africa has the biggest population living under absolute poverty. So as you grow your business, I wonder what your thought on not contributing to that system are.
So I think, first of all, being a local brand, we're already changing that status quo. I think how we speak to a consumer and how our consumer actually relates to us is also very different. We have what we call a proudly Zambian logo, which means that everything we do, actually, we look at we use products which are locally sourced. We talk about the impact we have on our ecosystem, which is really important for us. So whereas your multinationals may bring in product, we actually create a whole value chain which is local because we're proudly Zambian. So in a way, we're very different. And we also keep our money at home. The difference with multinationals is that the money ends up in Switzerland or in the UK, yet they're selling locally. Whereas we are from a country where we are operating, and that already makes a difference. Everybody in my business looks like me, if I can say it. And that's really important because most multinationals at the leadership level will be an expat, someone who has been brought in from wherever they've been brought in on very high salaries, because they are the ones who run the business for them, who are trusted. But it doesn't mean that Zambians cannot run businesses, and I think I'm testimony because I run my own business, and I have a whole team of Zambians who run my business. So already we see that we feed in differently. We're very different at what we add to our country, and that's why we need many more businesses which are locally owned, locally managed, and women managed too. Yeah.
Just to build on that, I remember when I was doing research on your bio, you have been on a United Nations panel, right, concerned with nutrition.
Yes.
So maybe you could elaborate more on how your foods are fortified and what that means and how that in part addresses at least nutritional inequality.
So it's an interesting one. We also had to really think about the business, how we were going to be impactful. One thing is also to be different how we run the business, but what was missing? And I think one of the things about inequality is also aspect of nutrition. And it is not only in Africa, but also everywhere in the world where we're seeing obesity, diabetes, all these, all these diseases come out because of what we are eating, right? So for us, we appreciate that noodles are processed, but we wanted to do something different. And it meant adding a little bit more and making the noodles slightly more expensive because we were really focused on nutrition. And our whole mission at Java is about affordable nutrition, about supporting farmers, creating affordable foods for a local population, right? And so nutrition is the core of what we do. And I was very honored to be appointed by the United Nations Secretary General a few years ago to sit on a panel which discusses how private sector, which is companies like Java, also have a role to play. Nutrition is not about governments alone, right? It's about us as private sector, because we're the ones who make the food. So if we're not a part of the conversation, then you're still gonna have bad food, right? And you still will have bad food because not all the food companies actually want to have that conversations, right? But you're better off having many more local companies, subscribe to that, because they see that they can make a difference to their environment, right? And that's why having more local companies, understanding where our ingredients come from, all that is really important. So I agree, and we still, even our next product, it might not be skinny popcorn, right? I think snacks is the thing I'm trying to tread, work very carefully on. But we're really trying to think it has to be something nutritionally focused, right? And that's my core. That's what I believe in as a founder. So I very much doubt you're going to see sugary drinks come out of us or sweets, because it's not our core. That's not what we believe in.
Yeah, Yusuf, I think you had your hand up.
I'm kind of going along the same thread is like founders, do they do fostering, facilitation, community, give back outreach, like maybe think of some classes, or is there stuff like that where it's health promotion, community build?
So community building is a lot of work, huh? It's what we're doing today is community building. If I was in Zambia, just the discussion about how to put packaging together, simple things about creating an ecosystem for other entrepreneurs is also community building, right? So whilst nutrition is only one aspect of it, but community building, and I think that we do a lot of that already. You're almost not obliged, but we are part of a community where we have to.
By design.
By design, maybe that's the right way to say it, yeah. Because I feel that, and again, we're not going to change anything in our countries if it's just one person, or if we don't support others or lift others. So we all have a role to play. I mean, I might not have billboards and big classes, but I can do small focus groups very similar to this. And we do a lot of them. There are a lot of associations where we come together to support others. And even things like angel networks. So we're seeing a lot more angel networks where people pitch, and the business community then will say, well, let me put $1,000 and this person gets $10,000 to buy a piece of equipment or, get a consultant for marketing. That changes everything for that company.
We have time for one more question.
I have a little question.
A new?
As an American, I grew up on like fast food ramen. I also love traditional ramen. It's like ramen. How is your ramen formatted? Do you have like different flavors? And if so, what are the favorite flavors?
Thank you. A business question, so at least they know I came to work. So that's the thing about what made us different, because you're right, ramen is all over the world, right? It's not all the same. So we realized that the only way we were going to sell is if we localize the flavor. And so I come from a landlocked country, which means we don't have sea around us, right? And a lot of our the imported brands that came in used to dump things like seafood flavor or and things that nobody in Zambia had because they'd never been to sea, right? And it excluded them because they didn't even like the flavor profile. So we very quickly saw that and created a variant of a chicken or a vegetable or something spicy, which is much more localized. And that's actually been the winning formula, because actually ramen is just wheat, isn't it? It's like pasta, right? Nothing to it. It's the flavor profile which creates the noodle, right? And so what we have done is really done a lot of tasting around it. Our largest movers are around beef or chicken, either spicy or otherwise, right? And now we're looking at a lot of interesting flavors. We're trying to see how, remember, it's affordability for us, because the minute you begin to have like an oil base, which is also really nice, a nice oil that you can put in the noodle, it just raises the cost, right? So we're trying to see how we can do a lot of innovation around that. And even for here in the US, my question was that, yeah, but how would I get an American to eat just chicken noodle? Because you have chicken noodle, right? So we have to also think about what is nice, authentic African taste and flavor, which would make you in the US want to buy it. So that was my challenge yesterday when someone asked me, I was like, I gotta get that flavor and call it something which would make you interested to say, I would like to try that, right? Yeah. So that, I think that's just really helped us. And also one last thing which has helped us is that we're not a microwave continent. One, power is an issue for many of the people, and also they use a lot of stovetops, right? So it meant that you couldn't really have a 2-minute noodle because it becomes very mashy on the stove if you overcooked it. So for us, our sort of recipe was a much more resilient cake. The noodle cake had to be much more resilient, which meant you could put anything in it, but it still looked like noodles. And that was actually it changed everything. It's a thicker strand. It's just a little bit of IP that we realized that people, chop stuff in it, they throw stuff in it, make it really nice, but it still needed to look like noodles. Not like mashed potatoes. And that's actually made a winning formula. Just a little bit of local knowledge, which just changed how we were different from an imported brand.
So no more potty worms.
Well, it's a big deal. I don't know if anyone knows what the potty worms are. They're like caterpillars, right? Very, very, and it's a superfood, actually, to be honest. And they're literally, and the only problem is how they're harvested. They literally almost have to burn down the trees to get these little caterpillars, so not sustainable. But they are very highly nutritious and they're quite expensive. So they're definitely for an elite upmarket.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
But if you had to sell them in another market.
Yeah. Gotcha. So I have tasted my potty worms, not my thing. But, yes.
Will there be samples?
Oh, I didn't bring I was asked, actually. I was asked. I'm sorry I didn't bring it. I just didn't know I should have actually.
It's all right, yes. Anyways, we'll now adjourn to the reception and more informal conversation. And I just wanted to make sure everyone at Georgia State knew that Monica Musonda has appeared completely pro bono today and even paid for her travel here. And so we have a big debt to you and we thank you for taking your time to share your experience and knowledge with us and our students.
Really happy.
And finally, I just want to thank all of our sponsors for this event that made it possible and particularly made the reception possible. So beyond the Institute for Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies and Zambians for Leadership in America, we want to recognize Women Lead, the Department of Political Science, the Department of African Studies, the Robinson College of Business Center for International Business Education and Research, the Atlanta Global Studies Center, the Center for Studies on Africa and its Diaspora, and the Office of International Initiatives.
Pretty good.
Thank you all. And the reception is outside of the hall, so see you there.